Small disclaimer.
This is not financial advice. I am not your financial advisor. All right, disclaimer complete. So, Bitcoin Cash. Why does it exist? Well, Bitcoin today can only do a couple of transactions a second. So what that means is that everybody in the world can't just hop over to Bitcoin and start buying coffee with it. The idea was, hey, if we make bigger blocks, if we make it so that you can do more transactions right away, people will start buying coffee and using Bitcoin Cash for everyday transactions. Here is where that falls apart. It does not look like it's even remotely possible for Bitcoin Cash to even replace something like Visa. Visa processes something like 45,000 transactions a second. Visa's not all checking accounts, it's just one way that people buy stuff. So for Bitcoin Cash to be able to go from beating Bitcoin, which is like 3-ish transactions a second, to beating Visa, which is 45,000 transactions a second, they're gonna have to increase by 1,000x. This is not easy, and Bitcoin Cash can't get remotely near what Visa can do in terms of transactions. So what's the solution? If you look at what Bitcoin actually ended up doing, they did something called SegWit. Now, SegWit does not make Bitcoin have the ability to overnight eat Visa, but what it does is it allows Bitcoin to work with other things that will not only allow it to eat Visa, but to maybe eat everything. If, like me, you're looking for super high multiple returns on money, meaning $1 in, lots of money out, holy bejesus, SegWit, you should pay attention to it. You should understand what it means, because it's super duper important, but only if you like money. So, a lot of people have this misconception that Bitcoin Cash is really trying to beat the current number of transactions that Bitcoin can do. Now, maybe people talk about that, but that's not really the right way to think about it. The way to think about it, I think, is that Bitcoin Cash is really trying to beat Visa. And if you look at like a venture capitalist, the way that they think about these things is, look, if you're trying to solve a hair on fire problem that no one else is, great, you can start being crap. But if you're trying to solve a problem that other people have already solved, if you're trying to beat Visa, then you need to be like 10 times better than Visa. And you know what the truth is? Bitcoin Cash, with its current roadmap, it's not at all going to be able to beat Visa. It won't even get close. But SegWit can not only match what Visa's doing and go another order of magnitude further than it, it can go orders of magnitude further. And we're going to tell you why in just a second. So what is SegWit? I'm going to give you a very basic explanation. I'd actually recommend Googling SegWit. There's a great article on Investopedia that does a nice job of explaining it. But SegWit stands for segregated witness. You have what's called blocks inside of a blockchain that shows you a sequence of transactions. And so with segregated witness, what you're doing is you're splitting this. So you have half the information that you used to have inside of a blockchain used to like show the transactions, and the other half is now open so that you can put more transactions in there. And then what happens is they have this additional, think of it like an additional column of information, and in this column you can start looking at connecting to what are called side chains or sister chains. And the reason this is so important is you can do things like interact with other networks like the Lightning Network, or you can connect to rootstock. So you need segregated witness because what it does is it allows you to massively multiply the amount of stuff that a protocol can do. So what is this fight? Where did it come from? Well, in the DNA of this fight, here's what happened. There was one school of thought, which is mostly developers, that was like, look, if you're a developer, you study technology adoption because as a really good developer, you care about getting a large return on your brain juice. Developers realize that, for really big adoption, it takes a long time. And so they thought, look, if this is gonna take a long time, how can we do the smallest thing that will make the biggest difference? And they said, we're gonna do SegWit. It's called segregated witness, the thing we just described. Now, on the other side, this other group was like, no, SegWit's dangerous. It's not gonna work, and people can attack it. So what we're gonna do instead is just make bigger blocks, because with bigger blocks, we can right away start having more transactions, with the caveat being that the more transactions is still not even remotely close to Visa, which is like 1,000x more than 1,000x more transactions that Bitcoin already had. Bitcoin Cash isn't going to get anywhere near that. Here's the thing, is that the main contention was that SegWit was dangerous. Now, SegWit has already happened, and the danger was that it would get hacked or attacked through game mechanics, that somebody could game the game mechanics and they could figure out a way how to basically like crash Bitcoin and then short it to make a ton of money. Well, here's the thing, if that was likely to happen, it very likely would have already happened. The fact that no one has crashed Bitcoin, that no one's hacked it and drove the value to zero by doing double spends, demonstrates that SegWit is probably safe. And so the main contention against SegWit, I mean, the main logical one, there's lots of emotional reasons and tribalism, but outside of that, like the main logical reason, in my mind, you know what? It's kind of past. I want to just remind us, and you're going to hear me say this, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. The big goal is to identify a protocol that's going to eat a valuable aspect of human nature. Now, if checking accounts are a valuable aspect of human nature, and I think they are, then we want to try to identify if there's going to be one protocol that's going to be super dominant, right? And just as a reminder, normal dominance is first place is doing better than second place. Super dominance is when the gap is always getting wider. So first place is always growing faster than second place. So if we compare Bitcoin Cash to Bitcoin, because of SegWit, SegWit's the important thing, and Bitcoin Cash could totally implement SegWit, but it doesn't look like they will, because like part of their whole thing is they're anti-SegWit. But SegWit, the agnostic of the protocol, SegWit is so important to help you get super dominance because it can potentially give you many orders of magnitude increases in performance. Because Bitcoin has implemented SegWit and Bitcoin Cash has not, Bitcoin is currently, in my mind, positioned to be super dominant versus Bitcoin Cash. I think about the long game. I'm not looking for like who's gonna be better in a day, in a month, even a year. I'm looking for like 10, 20-year time horizons because I care about super dominance, and that's how long these things take. You know, like the adoption of television, the adoption of washing machines, refrigerators, plumbing, right? So like these things take decades to adopt, but when they do, the returns are insane. It's true that Bitcoin Cash today might be able to process more transactions, but because Bitcoin has implemented SegWit, they can very likely, well, once the Lightning Network and other side chains activate, they'll be able to process hundreds, maybe thousands of times, maybe even hundreds of thousands of times more transactions than Bitcoin Cash because they haven't implemented SegWit. Here's an analogy, and I want to open this up for scrutiny, but this is just a starting point to wrap our brains around the differences. So let's say that you've got a boulder. It's a big, fat, heavy boulder. Let's look at the Bitcoin Cash and the Bitcoin approach to pulling this boulder. If a boulder is just like more transactions. The bigger the boulder, the more transactions. So we've got this big fat boulder, this huge number of transactions we want to process. Now, you can think of what Bitcoin Cash is doing like having a thicker rope. And yeah, it's true, like a thicker rope will definitely help you pull this boulder. But what happens if you want to pull 2 boulders or 10 boulders or 100 boulders? Do you just keep making thicker ropes, or do you introduce the idea of leverage? Back in the day, these savvy people invented a thing called a pulley. And the thing about this pulley is that it gave you massive leverage. Suddenly, with a decent rope and a decent pulley, you could pull many times more boulders than you could with just a thicker rope. And that's the difference between Bitcoin Cash and SegWit and Bitcoin. With Bitcoin Cash, yeah, they gave you a bigger rope and you can totally pull more of a boulder than you could without it. But with Bitcoin, thanks to SegWit, you can pull many times more boulders, potentially hundreds of thousands of times more boulders. Some people argue that they want to be able to pull more boulders now. And I get that, you know, but the truth is you're not really going to be able to pull that many more boulders now. And the cost, the trade-off, is that you give up potentially being able to pull way more boulders in the not too distant future. So it's really a question like, would you rather have a marginal improvement in your boulder pulling in the short term or a massive improvement in your boulder pulling in the long term? Well, if like me, you're looking for huge multiple returns, again, this is not financial advice, I'm not your financial advisor, but in the world of boulder pulling, I'd rather get a 1000x return on my investment into boulder pulling technology in the long term than a small, 5-10% increase in the short term.
As far as I know, we only have one cryptocurrency that is pursuing the attempt to remain as decentralized as possible, as censorship resistant as possible, as robust as possible, even at the expense of immediate scaling now on the base blockchain. I'm trying out new content, and if you like it, hit that like button. It lets me know to do more of this kind of thing. Also, maybe think about hitting that subscribe button. That's going to be it for today. Hope you folks stay in trouble and don't get caught. See ya.